The Metroid franchise has delivered compelling, yet understated narratives for the last 4 decades. Every game in the series presents intriguing mysteries that unravel through masterful subtext, memorable atmosphere, and environmental nuances. The heavy, powerful atmosphere of Super Metroid depicts the mostly silent struggle over the fallen planet Zebes. The eerie sectors of Metroid Fusion unravel terrible dangers and horrifying secrets. The beautiful but poisoned regions of Talon 4 reveal the crumbling legacy of the Chozo and a plague that must be found and eliminated. However, there's one game in the franchise that offers possibly the best, yet least appreciated story in the franchise, and that's Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. So in this video, we'll explore 3 very specific reasons why the overall narrative structure and world of Echoes delivers a surprisingly powerful and comprehensive story. If you enjoy this content, please remember to hit that subscribe button and let's dive in. Alright, so if you follow my channel, you'll know I recently created a whole playlist of deep dive videos that explore different aspects of Metroid Prime 2 Echoes for its recent 20th anniversary, ranging from the visuals to the boss fights and world design. I think it's a criminally underappreciated game in the Metroid series and broader gaming. So this time around, let's switch visors to investigate the story and the specific reasons why it excels. And yes, as a warning, there are full spoilers for the story ahead. I want to really emphasize up front that, like almost every other aspect of Echoes, the more you dig into the story, the more you'll get out of it. If you really piece together all the different threads and logbook entries and world design, you'll find a surprisingly rich and highly detailed story beyond what almost any other Metroid game has to offer, without sacrificing that feeling of isolation and exploration. Okay, so back to those 3 reasons we're going to discuss. The first reason this story excels is that Echoes is the Metroid game that adheres most closely to the classic hero's journey or hero's cycle, and that inherently creates a captivating story with a satisfying arc for the protagonist and world alike. This is a very relatable narrative. The defined structure feels unique against most other Metroid stories, which tend to unravel organically through more loosely structured exploration. The hero's journey is a narrative framework that outlines a common pattern found in many myths and stories across cultures. The framework originally described as many as 17 stages, though modern versions are often structured into just 12. Together, these stages naturally create a combination of intrigue, conflict, and ultimately character evolution. Although different Metroid games of course follow different pieces of this structure, Echoes is, in my opinion, the only one that follows all 12 stages in order almost to the letter, and it creates a rewarding loop for the player by the end. Let's quickly step through those stages one at a time to understand how they line up with the events of the game. Stage 1, The Ordinary World. The story begins with Samus Aran in her usual role as a bounty hunter. She accepts a seemingly routine or ordinary mission to investigate a distress signal from a Galactic Federation trooper squad. Stage 2, The Call to Adventure. Samus responds to the distress signal and travels to the planet Aether to investigate the disappearance of the trooper squad. I love the continual escalation of this initial call to adventure in the game. After Samus finds the trooper squad was wiped out, the quest then evolves into discovering what happened to them, which eventually further evolves into aiding the entire planet in a dark war. Stage 3, Refusal of the Call. While Samus does not explicitly refuse the call like reluctant literary heroes in some stories, she does face immediate and daunting challenges upon arriving on Aether. When first confronted with the Dark World, Samus shows some level of apprehension or uncertainty about entering its toxic environment and struggles with its side effects after initially returning to the Light World and losing many abilities. Stage 4, Meeting the Mentor. Samus explores the planet further and soon encounters Umos in the Great Temple, the last sentinel of the Luminoth. Umos provides Samus with crucial information about the planet's condition, the Ing threat, and essential guidance for how to proceed with her mission. He sends her off on a greater quest to save the planet with an upgraded visor to further understand and interface with the world around her. Stage 5, Crossing the Threshold. Samus fully commits to the adventure by quite literally crossing the threshold into the Dark World, even after understanding what a toxic environment this is. Her first real entrance into the twisted version of Aether reveals just how dark and challenging the task ahead will be, where the very atmosphere is lethal. In many stories, this threshold is more conceptual or purely thematic, but in Echoes, it's a very tangible and defined portal into the threat ahead. Stage 6 tests allies and enemies. Samus faces numerous tests in the form of environmental hazards, puzzles, and battles against ing creatures and other enemies. She also discovers unexpected allies in the form of fallen Luminoth who assist her on her quest by upgrading her visor and providing advice. And she of course also acquires new abilities and equipment which also serve as her allies in overcoming these challenges. Stage 7 Approach to the Inmost Cave. After battling her way through Agon Wastes and Torvus Bog to reach the planetary energy, Samus returns to Umos for the final phase of the conflict. Samus's ultimate goal is to reach the Sky Temple in the Dark World, the heart of the Ing's power, and to do this, she'll need to infiltrate the Sanctuary Fortress, the fallen technical stronghold of the Luminoth set high among the cliffs. Umos specifically tells Samus this will be her greatest test, as the most powerful creations of his people have fallen into evil hands. Stage 8 Major Ordeal. The Major Ordeal occurs when Samus battles her way through the Sanctuary Fortress and faces a dual threat of her greatest foes thus far. Samus must first face off a second time against a more powerful Dark Samus, and after defeating her malevolent doppelganger, Samus then must face off against Quadraxis, the pinnacle of Luminoth technology before it was corrupted. Stage 9 Reward, also known as Seizing the Sword. After defeating Quadraxis, Samus receives the Annihilator Beam, the most powerful weapon of the Luminoth that combines both light and dark energy, the closest thing to a mythical sword in the game. Upon immediately returning to Umos, Samus also receives the Light Suit, a gift from the Luminoth that will allow her to travel the Dark World unharmed while searching for keys to the Sky Temple stronghold. Stage 10, The Road Back. Samus is forced to retread almost all of Aether in search of the dark keys needed to access the Sky Temple. Along the way, she must solve various puzzles, survive the most poisonous places of the Dark World using her new suit, and battle enemies along the way. Eventually, this road leads her back to the Sky Temple, the Dark World version of the Great Temple where she first started her quest. Stage 11, Resurrection. In the climactic battle against the Emperor Ing, Samus faces her ultimate test. She must use all of her acquired skills and abilities to defeat this powerful foe and survive the collapsing Dark Dimension. In many ways, the light suit itself also represents resurrection. It identifies Samus's rebirth or evolution into the Luminoth's chosen warrior and allows her to travel the darkest strongholds unharmed. It also allows her to absorb the once powerful Phazon to instead use it as a weapon under her control. She has truly been reborn as a more powerful warrior. Stage 12, Return with the Elixir. After defeating the Emperor Ing and escaping the Dark Dimension, Samus returns to the light world of Aether. The planet begins to heal now that the planetary energy, or elixir, is restored and rebalanced. The Luminoth can rebuild their civilization. Samus departs the planet having restored peace and balance, and continues her journey as a bounty hunter with newfound experience and knowledge. Now, as I said, other Metroid games such as Metroid Fusion and Metroid Dread also replicate various portions of the hero cycle. However, I do think Echoes follows this cycle the most closely, and more importantly, I think Echoes implements this cycle in the most Metroid way. And that brings us to reason number 2 that I think the story of Echoes excels. Put simply, I think Echoes does the best job of any Metroid game of combining elements of a more cinematic, story-driven adventure with the isolation and solitude of a more traditional Metroid adventure. Echoes accomplishes this task in various ways. Although Echoes is much heavier on cutscenes than Metroid Prime 1, most of these cutscenes are still presented sparingly in an isolated context. For example, the demise of the Federation troops is depicted as a flashback cutscene from before they perished, which actually increases the feeling of dread or isolation despite showing more characters, since there are no survivors. When Samus meets Umos for the first time, it becomes painfully obvious what the war against the Ing has done to their kind. He's the last Luminoth sentinel who hasn't retreated to secure stasis pods. You can actually scan and see those pods in the Great Temple, which further contributes to the feeling of isolation since you can't talk to any of those survivors. Umos just acts as a guide or guardian type figure who needs your help rather than being part of an NPC-heavy Luminoth stronghold or fortress or anything like that. Witnessing only a single NPC in the flesh for most of the game adds intriguing narrative delivery without sacrificing the lonely atmosphere. This type of trick of presenting characters without fully showing them or making them interactive is used throughout the game beyond just the Federation troopers or Umos. Each of the 3 temples you must cleanse in the game holds a hologram of sorts, which contains a message from the last guardian or defender of that temple. This again introduces more characters, Luminoth culture, and narrative context, but all of them have already died and aren't even presented as full renderings, which helps maintain and reinforce that isolated feeling. There's a constant distance between you and these characters. Deceased Luminoth and Federation troopers are found across the environments and can be scanned for information, but not directly interacted with. This idea of never finding any survivors constantly adds to the weight of your quest. Now, this overall setup also provides meaningful payoff at the end of the game when you finally see some of the remaining Luminoth survivors after they emerge from their pods. This is one of the only moments in the entire franchise where you see multiple benevolent aliens from the same species presented together, aside from Federation soldiers and humans, obviously. It's also one of the only games in the franchise where you actually save the planet before it's destroyed or abandoned. In most Metroid games, you are clearing out a plague from an already fallen planet to stop it from spreading further, so there's something special about saving a still living world. And as a side note, I hope this allows the Luminoth or some elements of Echoes to return in Prime 4, but that might just be wishful thinking. The world itself also adds rich details to the story. After you clear out each of the temples and recapture the planetary energy, each region actually looks different visually. The sky of Aegon becomes clearer and brighter, the Torvus Bog rain dies down and the sunlight is more visible, and the same applies to the Sanctuary Fortress. So I think the story of Echoes successfully recaptures the isolation and investigation of Prime 1. However, I think it provides a unique feel by presenting a stronger, more cinematic or detailed narrative without the need for investigative scanning to understand the main thread of what's happening. Instead, the scanning just adds layers and more depths to that main thread. I think Metroid Prime 3 went too far in the cinematic storytelling direction. It didn't quite feel natural for the franchise, and it came at the expense of uninterrupted atmosphere, investigative depth with the scan visor, and deeper environmental exploration. And that takes us to the third and final reason I think the story of Echoes truly excels, which is the sheer quantity and quality of lore and narrative details scattered throughout the game. Echoes provides every detail from research to creatures to machinery, and most importantly, the lore. Interestingly, Echoes actually has several simultaneous plot threads going on at once in these log entries, which are all cleverly intertwined and presented across separate types of lore entries. You just have to really take the time to find them and dig into them. I'm guessing many players will actually go through this entire game not fully understanding the different threads that are at work and how they're related. First, we have the data logs recovered from the fallen Federation task force Heracles. This task force patrolled the Dasher region of space and ended up pursuing a space pirate supply vessel near the planet Ether. The space pirate vessel was damaged but successfully escaped their immediate pursuit. The Federation vessel was damaged by the stormy atmosphere of Ether, so the soldiers were forced to set up repairs and recon on the planet's surface. Eventually, they were attacked and wiped out by a nest of dark splinters. Samus discovers their remains sometime later, and most of this information is shown through a flashback cutscene. The Federation log entries, though, detail some of their personal experiences and thoughts during the mission. Second, we have the pirate logs. The space pirates actually play a fairly secondary or side role in this game versus some of the other Metroid titles. The log entries describe how they set up a base on Ether prior to the start of the game and are primarily back to investigating and harvesting Phazon and performing their usual experiments. However, they quickly get caught up in the planetary war with the Ing after raids from the dark creatures and after discovering one of the portals between the light and dark dimensions. Somewhat comically, they are frustrated by their operations continually being interrupted by multiple parties, including the aggressive Ing, the pursuant Federation troopers, Dark Samus, and the arrival of Samus herself. The ship the Federation troopers tried to shoot down was actually a supply run to this larger base of operations in the Aegon Wastes as they harvest Phazon. The pirate logs conclude by implying the space pirates will forge an alliance with Dark Samus against their mortal enemy Samus by trading Phazon. And finally, we have the Luminoth lore, which is the most extensive and important set of lore logbook entries in the game. These logs describe how the Luminoth first came to settle and thrive on Ether, the impact of the Leviathan that scorched and tore apart their world, and the long and significant conflict against the Ing. Unlike the fairly vague and prophetic lore of Metroid Prime 1, which is interesting in its own way, the Luminoth lore in Echoes is actually very specific, sequential, and detailed if you take the time to read through it. These entries explain in great detail the progression of the war, the Luminoth plans to win the war, how those plans failed, and so on. The logbooks also provide helpful context for the main narrative, such as explaining where the control device came from that you use to transfer planetary energy, why it's so critical to the Luminoth conflict, where the different beam weapons came from, why different parts of the world are in the state that they're in, and so on. Aside from these core pillars of lore, there are also other tidbits scattered throughout the world. Echoes has by far the most extensive scan visor experience of any Metroid game, something I hope they bring back full force in Prime 4. Bodies of the Luminoth can be found scattered around the world, and scanning them reveals interesting insights about their bravery or objectives, even if they aren't official lore entries. This information really helps humanize the Luminoth in a way we don't often see in Metroid for other species, and I really enjoyed this element. Machinery and enemies and environmental details provide rich context about the world and conflict around you. The scan visor was greatly upgraded in this game over the first Metroid Prime to allow for this additional immersion in terms of analyzing your environment. So what do you think of the story of Echoes? Did you dig into all of this and discover the secrets and details, or do you prefer other Metroid stories over this one? Please hit those subscribe and like buttons, leave a comment, and let's discuss.